You know that traditional interviewing leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to building a top-performing sales team that hits their numbers. This is because you're not just hiring a resume or a skill set. You're hiring salespeople who are experts at presenting their best side, but may not be able to exceed their sales goals or be a good match for your team. To be sure you're making the right call, you need real feedback from previous sales managers and colleagues who can tell you if they can build a robust pipeline, if they're able to negotiate mutually acceptable outcomes, and ultimately, if they meet or exceed their sales goals. Given the missed quotas and lost revenue that come with adding the wrong person to your team, it's worth finding out how industry-leading companies, large and small, around the world are using Skills Survey's Pre-Hire 360 to be sure they always make the right hire.
On the call presenting for us this afternoon, we have Jack Kramer. Jack is the Senior Vice President of Field Operations for Skills Survey. Jack, welcome to the call.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Thank you, and good afternoon and good morning to everybody on the call. I wanted to spend some time with you today talking about something that we think and we've seen our customers over the course of the last few years make a huge impact on kind of wading through the smoke and mirrors, the noise that's out there when you're trying to get to the heart of a sales recruit and figure out whether or not they're going to be good or a problem for you when you move forward. So what I did is I'm kind of going to give you a little bit of a history of where we've come with the whole concept of reference checking, and then apply it to really what you would see in today's world with some different tools. But I really want you guys to have an opportunity to look at this thing a little differently, think about it differently, and think how it might apply to how things would be working in your organization. So if you think about the history of reference checking, you know, one of the things that we look back on for those who have recruited for a number of years, it was historically one of the most important steps in the hiring process. And a lot of times it was not about trying to get a person, a reference, to say something bad about a candidate. A lot of times it was basically a future manager talking to a previous manager, you know, saying basically, hey, what can I do? What can you tell me about this person that can help me make this person into an A-plus player? You know, what do they do day to day? You know, what are they all about? How do they work? And you know, if they do have some challenges, because nobody's perfect, you know, what can I do to surround them with people, process, training, those kind of things to make them into an A-plus player? You know, when you really look at it, we were kind of thinking about actionable information, you know, and at the end of the day, a lot of those discussions never really provided actionable information. You know, did they help make a final decision on a candidate? It was very, very rare for somebody to basically come out of a reference phone call and say, boy, I'm not going to hire this person. A lot of times it didn't screen somebody out or have a candidate rise to the top. And that was one of the things that you think about. You know, sometimes you'll interview somebody who really maybe is a little introverted or something like that, but they're terrific in their job, and you know, you want people to tell you about that, and a lot of times that didn't help. And at the end of the day, you know, this information you collected, was it really going to help kind of predict future behavior? Were you really going to find out whether or not somebody is going to be successful or not? And you know, this is part of the problem with the reference checking process. So you think about the history of it. Again, it was for a long time, it was really, really important, and over time it started to tail off. Since introducing tools like online reference checking, you know, we've seen it come back. But we asked two questions. Do we want to make it relevant again? And for you in particular, in your organization, your workflow for hiring folks, should it be? Should it be something that you would care about? So let's go through a quick history lesson on what happened. And at the bottom line, the lawyers got involved. And you know, in the 1990s and into the new millennium, you know, there were a number of issues where litigation went through the process, through the courts, and some judgments were made around, some pretty significant judgments were made in almost across all industries in the late 90s, early 2000s. So when that happened, legal crackdown, they start working with HR, and they put policies in place that say no more reference checking. Or they say you can reference check, but we have to outsource it to a third party, which becomes basically a check-the-box kind of process. A lot of folks just plain old stop doing it, and that, when you start looking at that process, it's really not a good thing. For those who said we are going to try to do reference checking, we're really going to go out there and give it a shot, especially nowadays with caller ID and phone mail, email, and all those things. You know, it literally is countless hours of phone tag, email tag, etc. You know, basically one of the things I volunteered to do a reference phone call for a former manager of mine who was an outstanding manager, outstanding individual in general. And it literally took us almost 10, 11 working days from the time that I received an email from a recruiter to the time we actually got on the phone. You know, mainly because, you know, we're busy, we have meetings, travel, et cetera. So, and all of that, really, after that phone call, I provided no actionable information about this person. They didn't ask me questions, and I wasn't volunteering. I just wanted to complete the process, check the box for my former manager, and move on. No actionable information, right? So, you know, when you start looking at candidates in general, you know, you got to start looking at it from a what's the problem perspective. You know, these days, most candidates do a terrific job presenting themselves during the interview. They're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. They're team players. They work really hard. They don't sit on the social tools all day long, Facebook and LinkedIn, and play 6 fantasy sports leagues on ESPN. And obviously, they always do the right thing and very ethical, all those kind of things. The second component to that is boy, if you just Google interview questions or prep for an interview, you get great videos, documentation, quick answers to tough questions, all those kind of things. You know, these folks are getting really good at interviewing. So it's one of those things when you look at the whole process you go through, you got professional interviewers, and then you think about everything they're telling you is from their perspective, you know, that they are terrific, they work hard, and all those kind of things. So you really want to make sure that you're going to understand exactly how this person is going to operate, you know, post, you know, onboarding and first few days at your organization into their you know, career with you. So, you know, we're trying to basically say you need a real true 360 review of folks, and we're going to try to make sure that that happens. So, the reason that you look at that, obviously, you know, there is an impact of making a mistake. You know, what is the bad hire impact? Every organization has something different. So, you know, if you look at your own organization, you may say, we have a hard dollar cost. When I sit with the finance team or the owner of an organization, and we know that if I hire somebody who will make a mistake, it's salary, training, exit costs, et cetera. For those who sell and work in an environment where you need a number of folks on a team, where it is a team sell, maybe it's a major account or complex sales cycle, you need engineering and finance and technical support and customer support, et cetera, it can turn teams against each other and turn a significant amount of turmoil into your organization. And finally, when you think about people interacting with salespeople interacting with customers, I mean, if you got somebody out there who's not treating your customers well, obviously you're going to have satisfaction issues, customer sat issues that are going to eventually get down to the bottom line. That really doesn't even impact, you know, the things like compliance and things like WorldCom and Enron and some of the implosions we had back in 2008, 2009. So again, those are the kind of things you look at across the organization. But, you know, for sales in particular, the cost of lost revenue is basically tied to your only asset, which is time. And I tell my teams all the time, you know, an accountant can sit down and work a spreadsheet at 3 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning. An engineer can work on a project in the middle of the night. Salespeople can't. They've got between 8 and 6 o'clock usually to get in front of people, and that's the only time they can do it. Once you lose that time, you lose it forever. So I'm going to put a little quiz out there for you to think about. $23 million, $160,000. So keep that in mind here as I tell you a little story about some of the results that you can find using tools like this, and these are directly coming out of my customers. So if we look at some of the statistics, in 2011, we, with my customers, we put 3,500 sales candidates through an online reference tool. You know, what we were looking at is very specific competencies and behaviors based on their particular job role. Predictive of behavior, very scientific, very important to understand those nuances. What we found was about 11%, or 386 of these candidates came through with what we term risky or avoidable people. So 386 candidates who made it all through the screening process, maybe through first phone calls, maybe they even got into corporate and you know, job offer was pending, reference checks. So all the way through the process, we found that 386 people made it through before they ran into skill survey in my customer's process. So if you take $60,000, which is the average cost of a United States and a Canadian and North American salesperson, that number comes to $23 million. So you can see what the impact is on an organization if you think about your own organization and how many times we've made mistakes in hiring somebody that looked great on paper and didn't necessarily play out. One of the things that brought to my attention recently in the last couple of months was a customer told me that it's just not individual contributors. One of the things they found was that they were really using our tool and getting a lot of benefits out of screening out sales managers, which, again, if you think about the volume and the cost associated with bringing a sales manager on, the turmoil to a team, all those kind of things, 171 candidates, so you can kind of do the math there if you'd like to take a look at your own organization. So we go back to the problem. And when you get specific to salespeople, everybody knows salespeople are terrific at presenting themselves. I mean, that's what they do. Most people buy from people they like. Most salespeople are very good at presenting themselves. One of the things I always love is I always ask salespeople, you know, so what happened when you missed your quota? What did you do? How did you react? What did you do to make yourself better? It's rare that somebody says to me, oh, I've never missed a quota. But a lot of times they'll allude to the fact that they always have, and you know they've been terrific. And you know, if you're so successful where you are, why are you leaving? Right? And that's the next question that you always hear about. And you've got, again, the standard answers, and they're very well versed on things about, you know, reorganizing territories, or marketing's not doing their job, or they cut on my commissions and things like that. So, you know, again, you start looking at the data and the tools and the information that's available out on the web to help people answer these questions. You hear it over and over and over again. So let's look at some statistics. We got a lot of really great statistics when it comes to sales and the impact good hiring makes on an organization. When you talk about sales vice president, 44% have a view that, you know, they could do a better job picking successful salespeople. So, you know, they would have done a better job. They would have been in a better place if they had done a better job. When you look at top performers, you know, 4 to 5 times, you know, the profit than lower end performers. So again, these are all information that you can actually take and put into your world to say, oh, you know what, that is absolutely true. One of the things that we saw recently was a really great white paper that, you know, and again, every organization manages it differently, but when you say 2 to 3 times the hiring cost, I did that 60,000. I did a 1-to-1 cost. Most organizations will say it's a 2x, 3x times their base salary. So there is a huge impact when it comes to making a successful or having a challenging hire. And finally, most organizations, everything from a startup to a large multinational, when you look at what investment you make in the field, in the field sales teams, I mean, it is your biggest investment because it does provide you the biggest return on your investment once you get your products, your markets, and things like that set. So, you know, one of the things that we always continually look at is what is it specific to the sales teams. And again, from my personal experience, you know, you make a bad decision on a hire, 6 months to ramp them, 6 months to figure out they're not successful, 6 months to fill somebody that role, you've lost 18 months, and a lot of times you can't get that back. Missed forecast, revenue plans, expense plans out of whack. The team turmoil, I mean, those are very, very important things. And again, if you start looking at, you know, salespeople rolling in and out of your organization, you know, customers understand that. Customers see people. I've had 5 or 6 different salespeople from my CRM vendor in the last 12 months. And now it's just noise every time somebody calls me. So, you know, I understand these things, and again, it comes down to you only have one shot a lot of times to make an impression. You only have one shot to get something done. Other than that, the time, the effort, everything goes away. So, you know, one of the things that we always want to let you know is because we know the issues, we do know there is a solution out there. So, you know, one of the things that we look at from a solution perspective is, you know, if we could provide a tool that will give you insight that says, hey, between 10 and 15% of all those candidates running through are going to basically kind of show up and be seen exactly as they are and how they performed in the past, I think everybody would want to take a second look at an opportunity like that. So let's talk about the perspective, and this is really important because you think about everything you see today from the candidate, it is from their perspective, and whether it's you think you're really great at phone interviewing or your team does a great job screening, or you maybe use some pre-hire personality assessments where the candidate fills out some kind of assessment to say this is who I really am, they're basically now trained to tell you exactly what you want to hear. They interview well, they're terrific, work weekends, the whole thing. And then, you get to the reference, and you basically say to the reference, hey, how was this person? And because you can't ask specific questions about the person that's going to help you really understand whether or not they're going to help you make them successful in your organization because of legal reasons, it stays very superficial. So, and of course, the reference has been well versed by the candidate, and basically they tell you exactly what you want to hear. And then finally, looking at it from a different lens, and that's what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to say there's a new way, there's a different way, it's a different paradigm, if you will. We still think those references are important, right? Because those references watch these individuals every day in the job that you want them to take at your organization. So we're still going to go out there, but we're going to give them a survey that's very job specific. A major account person is very different than an inside salesperson, different than somebody working at a retail store. So, we want to go out to those references, scientifically ask them about competencies and behaviors that typically are the reason somebody is successful or not. A lot of times, working hard is not necessarily the reason somebody is unsuccessful or is challenged in a long-term career with your organization. A lot of times it's around dependability and teamwork and interpersonal skills and work ethic. Can these people fit into your organization the way you need them to fit into? And you start looking at these kind of things, those green circles there. Those are the reasons people get let go from an organization, not because they couldn't use Excel spreadsheet or they didn't keep their CRM up to date. So these are the kind of things that we're going to uncover because we've been studying the market, we're studying the personalities and behaviors of salespeople, and we can help project those forward, not from the candidate's perspective, but from the perspective of people who have watched this behavior before, okay? Now, you might ask, how can this work and how does it process and all those things? And I'm going to kind of walk you through how it works, but two things I wanted to point out. On the right-hand side there, typical phone thing, we call that affectionately the old-fashioned way. It could take 5 to 10 working days. It took me 10 to 11 to do a reference check that I really wanted to do. Picture if I didn't want to do it. We get things done. The September average was 1.92 days from the time that you would enter a candidate in to when you get a report ready. And you're going to see between 5 and 10% of these candidates being highlighted that you want to take a second look or potentially walk away. And I'll walk you through some of those statistics now. But a lot of times people will ask, well, how did you see this impact your organization, and what was the benefit? And so, we're going to prove a lot of the operation, and I'm going to walk you through some of the issues around quality of hire and hiring manager effectiveness and the, getting it from 5 to 10 working days to 1.92 and some of the neat things around sourcing. But really what HR legal likes is that we do drive consistency and a similar approach. Everybody's treated the same way. Workflow, very scientifically validated behaviors, compliance, consistency, all those things. And at the end of the day, what it's going to do, it's going to put you in a different light. It's going to put recruiting and talent acquisition, anybody that's on the front line dealing with bringing sales folks into your organization, it's going to raise your impact on the organization. So when we talk about quality of hire, one of the things that we see in our database is when you really look at the green bar, that's about 80 to 85% of the folks that come through are validated. So, and I'm going to show you that. It really, they've been screened well, they fit well, and their references are telling you that. This next area, depending on the customer, 10 to 15% have moderated risk, some kind of issues. I had hired an account manager recently, and one of the things that came out of the skill survey on her was that she's terrible with Excel. So every time we send an Excel spreadsheet out, we talk about, hey, do you need to do anything? If you need to change it, this is how it's sorted and those kind of things. And it's been great. Now, if I had found that out 6 months after she got here and I was frustrated with her and it impacted my my feelings about her ability to succeed at my company, all those things would have been there. But I knew about it well before she got there. We built an onboarding plan and a curriculum to help her get up to speed quickly. And finally, this 5 to 10% of folks who are coming through are going to be what we say are high risk or folks you should potentially walk away from. So I'm going to show you a sample of that in a moment. When you talk about hiring managers and hiring teams, one of the things that is a best practice amongst our customers is to use the reference reports, this type of report prior to final interviews. So you bring 2 or 3 people in. We've all done it. You bring two or three people in, and that third person looked great on paper, but when they showed up, they green suit, purple hat kind of thing, and they just didn't really fit what they looked like on paper over the phone. A lot of times we'd screen somebody out. We'd screen that person out. Now we're bringing only 2 people in. We're putting those folks in front of the hiring managers with a report that actually leads them through the interview. So anywhere where there's a gap or where there's a low-scoring category, we can actually put up some questions to them so that they can ask things about meeting quota and how they get along with other folks on the team and treating people with different backgrounds, all sorts of questions, but lead those hiring managers through interviews. A good example of that would be in this case where, point F, if you wanted to talk to somebody about working well under pressure, multitasking, trying to complete a project or budget something on time. This again, if you think about working on a big, huge project and you got 4 of them going at one time, how does this person work well under pressure? So again, it's one of these things where you look at it and you want to say, boy, if I could ask this person about this and see how they're doing and ask them to tell me when they had a problem like this, what did they do? It would lead that person through the interview process in a much more efficient manner. We talk about the efficiency play, and this is really a great thing. I mentioned that you bringing in the 3 people. One of the big things that we see in all of our customers is, they want to try to make the process more efficient. They want to make the hiring manager more effective. They want to cut down on the cost per diem and the aggravation of bringing 3 people in for interview days, whether it's at a remote corporate, regional office or at corporate. And so you bring those folks, you screen them down, run through the skill survey, and then limit the number of people you actually bring in. So not only do you save time and money on that process, but one of the things that we've looked at both internally and externally is the time it takes to process through. So CH2M Hill is one of our customers, a big engineering construction firm in Colorado. Tim Keefe, who runs that group, is a big Six Sigma shop. So he knew down to the minute what it takes to get somebody through the process from the time they hit the career page to onboarding. Basically, he saw about a 55 work week reduction in time. So if you think about the time and effort you put into this, it really can benefit you and make you more efficient working on the things that are more important for the long-term health of your career as well as the company. And one of the differences, one of the real benefits of having a tool like this, an online tool, is that we can actually capture some passive candidates. So if you think about the process, you got 100 job openings, you're going to screen 3 people. We get 5 references per candidate now, and you're going to get 1,500 people that are going to be exposed to your organization, because when we finish up the process, we ask them if they'd like to be considered for job opportunities at your organization. Right now, we get about 35% of those folks come through and say, yes, I'd like to take a look at that. You then can use them to source and find people maybe for a difficult-to-fill job, maybe senior roles. Great people know great people. If a candidate scores really well and their manager said, yes, I would be considered, so maybe that's the source of that high-scoring candidate, great training, great work around there. So, again, most times an ATS holds or a job application holds some references, or they're in a Word doc or something like that. We're going to capture those and present them to you for the opportunity to source from them. Finally, when you look at risk and compliance and all the things the legal people and your compliance teams might be caring about, it's absolutely mission critical that all the things you do are covered by your vendor to make sure that scientifically they've been validated in a couple of ways. One is to make sure that when we put a survey out there for a major account salesperson, that it's actually going to predict behavior. And the second thing is that making sure that every survey that goes to every potential candidate does nothing to put you in a risk when it comes to EEOC and OFCCP and the laws of the land. So, no adverse impact, no bias, and all those kind of things. So again, you got to make sure that those things are covered, and that's an important aspect behind it. Because when you think about the questions and answers that you may ask, if you are asking people on the phone, one of the things that gets HR legal people really upset is when you start asking questions around background and future behavior and things like that. So make sure that whatever you're going to do, you make sure you're very consistent, you're very clear, and all those have been reviewed through with your HR legal teams and compliance folks, because you can get yourself in real trouble. There's a great case study floating around the web now about a company who was hiring inner-city employees, and by asking them what high school they went to, they were showing bias because there were a number of high schools that were in different areas of the city and different ethnic backgrounds. So, it's really important to make sure you're doing that. Make sure you have a standard process, and make sure if you are not using one of these tools that you're very careful, because you can get yourself in big trouble. But basically, when you start looking at the ROI, I mean, one of the things we're going to show, I'll walk you through, and you can kind of put it into your own terms, but you're going to see a lot of benefits in this system. You're going to see a lot of ability to impact finance and your ROI and budgets and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're moving from a case of like screening, filling a seat, to basically elevating the role within your organization of anybody who's recruiting and trying to bring talent into your building. So, that's kind of our soapbox thing, but we really think it adds value to what you're doing. So I'm going to walk you through very high level how a system like this works. That's the first question, because it is new. It's kind of where an ATS may have been, 7, 8 years ago, or a performance management tool was in 2005, 2006. So again, it's very simple. Step one, you put a candidate into skill survey. It takes less than a minute. The candidate gets an email, links to the site. They put their references in. The references get a link to a survey. They fill it out. It takes about 10 minutes to fill out, and the whole time we're ready and aggregating a report, getting it ready to show you. We're specifically going to focus on some sales examples here, but if you do recruiting outside the organization, any other part of the business, the survey is available for everybody from from an entry level to a senior level person, and even down to 70 or 80 clinical roles for a hospital. But let's talk about Patrick. Our candidate's name is Patrick T. Patrick is going for a major account job. So basically, you need his name, his first name, last name, email ID, position they're applying for. You come down here and you select from the list of surveys. Obviously, as you recruit in your own world, you know that an inside sales is different than a retail, than maybe a pre-sale person or somebody who sells over the phone, or maybe does a little sales and service. Again, all those competencies and behaviors are different. So once you put Patrick in, you're going for a major account, you select his survey, you hit send email, and then you're done. So, one of the things that we find is pretty important, that, again, when we talk about sales and sales management, we also have a number of areas where you might have customer service roles that do some upselling. I was in a retailer recently where I was taking something back and ended up upselling me, and I bought way more than I wanted to in that trip. But it was clear this person was upselling me every step of the way. We found in our customer service library that 12% of all customer service folks came through with low scores. So it kind of ties back to that sales thing, that any of these 10 to 15% are going to come back with risky scores. So if we go back to Patrick. So Patrick is going in. We select major account. We send the candidate email, and then what happens is basically Patrick gets an email from your company, and it says, "Hey, welcome. Thank you for coming to potentially work for us. Here's the process. We're going to use a tool to get your references." He clicks on the link. He comes over here. He puts his references into Skill Survey. He signs off on a waiver that basically says, "I'm going to release everybody, former, current, and future employees and people involved with this, from any liability." He clicks the Send Email button, and then we take over. We're going to go out to the references. We're going to send them a link, and we're going to bring them right back here. And we're going to bring them back to our survey. And the survey is a very simple survey. 1, I've never seen behavior. 7, I've seen it all the time. I'm going to highlight a couple things in here because, in a major account role, one of the things I mentioned earlier was, the reasons people are not successful: teamwork and interpersonal skills and working communication, things like that. One of the things we see a lot of times in these reports is that people have a tendency to tell you a story. Point 4, meet or consistently meet or exceed sales goals. And then again, point 10, building relationships, coworkers, customers, etc. We also ask for verbatim comments. Top 3 things they could do well, top 3 things they might need to work on. And then finally we say, would you like to be considered for jobs? And it's that passive sourcing tool. If they say yes here, you can actually link them right here. You can link them right to your own company's career page, your website, some other landing page to help them understand exactly what you want to do and how it might want to work. So you never know if you're going to get somebody on a bad day. They've always wanted to work at your organization, your company, and you found a way to get to them without having to find them on LinkedIn or on some job board. So let's look at the report. So once we get the reports back, this is a great example of a report that shows a validated candidate. This is somebody that's at 80–85%. I talked about that green bar. You know, if you look across the report and the overall scoring goes from very low to very high. The blue bar is the aggregate of everybody's score. Gold bar is just former managers because they do score differently. They score a little heavier, a little lighter. So if you don't break those out, you know, you're not going to get a good representation. And then overall, the distribution, you can see there, that medium score there in the middle there, maybe it's a little bit of a gap, like my person who didn't do well with Excel. And then we break it down by different clusters. And there's typically 4 to 5 clusters depending on individual contributor versus a leader. And again, this is the way it should all work. So if you look at, you know, the scoring from very low to very high, you know, the one gap they had was point G, staying up to date on company product features and policies. That would be great for me to know, because every time we announce a new release of a product or a new version or something updating, you know, just make sure you just double check with that individual. Did you get it? Do you understand it? Is there anything else we can help you with? So fortunately for our customers, and unfortunately for some candidates, we get about 10 to 15% of people come through looking like this. So again, the scoring's in the medium to medium-low area. You can see the distribution is towards the left, not towards the right. And then you start looking at those clusters, and I always talk about the story that these reports tell. And you know, here's that one about meeting or exceeding sales goals. And I'm sure that this person during the interview talked about every time they met quota, every time they went to a club trip, and all those kind of things. You start looking at some of the other clusters like interpersonal skills. Some things start to jump out: maintaining relationship, building strong relationships, internal and external. You know, those are the kind of things that you know, that you should be aware of. And what the references are trying to tell you is that if this is the kind of person that you need continually out working with internal and external teams, might not be working, because as we take a look at some of the verbatims, you know, basically they're saying this person has great, you know, hunting skills, gets out there, goes and sells something, knows how to sell. But if you look at what they could work on, you know, they tend to work alone, very demanding of themselves and teammates, relationships building. If you need somebody to stay with a customer after they get the PO, he's not right. Even down to this 4th bullet point, temper. He's quick to react, but also to calm down. So again, the story out there being told is that if you're looking for a hunter who never has to deal with anybody else, this person might be your guy. But if you are somebody that needs teamwork and people working together, both internally and externally, I think you might want to take a second look at them. So when you think about that, we've gone through, you've got a great profile of a winner, maybe somebody that might be a little bit challenged in your environment. Then you look at the ancillary benefits, and I mentioned that passive database. So I just went into one of our customers and I typed in job title, area of expertise, sales. What I found was a list of a who's who of people out there who may be interested in opportunities. Now remember, these folks were passive candidates. They were not active looking for a job. They were a candidate's reference that you said, hey, would you like to be considered for a job here? They said yes, drop into the database. You can click on them, go over and look at their LinkedIn profile, start the networking and all of that. So, you know, the neat thing about it is when you think about hard to fill jobs and you find an A player, you find somebody that's really great, and maybe they're an individual contributor, if their managers in previous lives are on this list, you know you're getting that whole eagle and eagle concept. You know, they all flock together. So, you know, we talk about a better process, and I think, you know, hopefully what we were able to show you today is that there are different ways to get through the noise, to get to the heart of the matter in a sales candidate to find out whether or not they're going to fit. Obviously, every organization has a different meter that makes a difference as far as what is quality of hire and managing turnover and also looking at your day jobs. I mean, we're all struggling to get through the day and the weeks and the months worth of work. You know, this could help spend a lot of time, take a lot of time out of your day, but also add tremendous value. And what's really great about it is it's a quick win, quick implementation for anybody in this environment. Literally, the system can be up and running in less than 2 hours. And you know, from a perspective of the size of the organization, depending on how small or how large you are, it can start as a pilot and move to a much bigger thing. So, you know, at the end of the day, we're excited about assisting and moving the role of recruitment in an organization and really bringing it to the forefront. So my only commercial here is really not necessarily to sell you on skill survey, but it's basically let you know that the process is not a brand new thing. We've been in business about 10 years. This past month, we ran almost 34,000 candidates through skill survey. So you can see with us, we have over 600 customers. I'll show you those folks in a minute. I mean, we're just really fortunate to work with the who's who of best practice recruiting companies. And you probably know them as your competitors or peer companies or sister companies or companies that are in your area, maybe in your town or your state. But a lot of these companies are the who's who of talent acquisition and recruiting, in particular, adding tremendous benefit to their organization. So we're fortunate to work with them, get great ideas from them, enhance our platform, our solution, and you know, hopefully assist and keep them at the forefront of recruiting and screening in sales individuals. So Ryan, that was what I had to cover. I wanted to open it up to see if there are some questions that needed to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this time, I'd like to remind everybody to go ahead and enter your questions into the questions and answer panel on the right side of your screen. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. And Jack, let's start with our first question. We do have a lot coming in queue, so we'll start here with the first one. What do you mean by validation in science? Why is it important?
Yeah, there's two things with it. One is to make sure that if we ask a question, that it's going to create an answer from a reference that's going to actually help predict behavior. And the only way to do that is to have a validation study being done, which means that if you ran 100 salespeople through the system in 2011, and 15 of those had low scores and were hired, a year later you want to do a study with the company that ran those people through and find out, out of the 100 people, how many of those with low scores were hired and how many succeeded in their roles. And what you do there, and it takes a lot of time. It takes 18 months, 2 years, and a lot of data from your HRIS system or your HR systems, performance management systems, and you tie them all together. So you want to validate that they are behaviors that will predict future behaviors. The second thing is you want to make sure it's been validated against the laws of the land, EEOC and things like that. Make sure that you do have the proper tools and the proper studies in place, and the vendors can document it, because just because you have a question on a piece of paper in a form that goes out via electronic or online or anything like that doesn't mean that it's been run through the compliance machine and can protect you and stand up in the court of law.
Okay, great. And let's go on. We'll move on to some cost structures. Do you have a cost associated with bad hires, specifically sales hires? Yeah,
I mean, we've talked to our customers, and literally you could probably go from a 1x, which is the most conservative number, and that's what I used in the beginning of the presentation, to 3 to 4x, depending on what type of salesperson you are, and it's usually tied, from what our customers tell me, is to the ramp time and the training it takes to get somebody into the building, onboarded, trained, and through the cycle to the point where they can get out and start producing revenue. So at minimum, I have heard anything from 1x to 3 to 4x, depending on how much time and effort it takes to actually get somebody onboarded.
Okay, great. Next question, do you have a list of top questions or recommendations we should be using? Then there's another one here. It might be phrased a little better. Why do you have different types of sales surveys? Do they really make a difference? I think they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand. So we have IO psychologists on staff that literally, they'll go out and they'll create a profile for what an A-plus player looks like. And then we want to make sure we're going to ask those references, how did this candidate perform against an A-plus player? And if you even think about sales organization, you think about an entry-level salesperson versus a major account salesperson. You think about an inside salesperson who works over the phone. We even have one of those pop-up windows that you see if you're on a Verizon or AT&T or Staples, when they say, hey, can we help you with something, as you're on their website. All those behaviors and competencies are a little different. A lot of them are, you may have some that are similar, do you treat customers well and all those things, but then it becomes a little bit more dynamic. A major account person needs to be, big team effort, and a lot of complex interactions with both the internal team to help build the final solution proposal, et cetera, and then presenting it and externally dealing and selling to 5, 7, 10 people. So the behaviors are very different, and we want to make sure we're going to go back to the references and ask very, very specific questions that have been validated by IO psychologists and compliance folks to make sure that it, number one, will help predict behavior, and number two, will give you insight into, is this person a good fit for our organization and how we're going to use them.
Okay, great. And what was the reason, I guess these two here will go hand in hand as well. Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned sales cycle decrease from 10 to 2 days. Do you have any number around the cost savings related to cutting the hiring cycle down from 10 to 2 days? And what was the reason from those for those sales folks? What was the reason those sales folks were high risk? Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Well, there's two things. I think the one big thing that we found is, and I probably talked about 40 or 50 of my customers in the last 12 to 18 months. You know, it's all based around the time to time and productivity, time to revenue production. So when you look about the cost of a bad hire, especially in a salesperson, a lot of people will look at, all right, well, maybe I paid this person $60,000 a year. He was only on board for 6 months, so my out-of-pocket was 30 plus, some benefits is maybe 42, 43,000. But that doesn't, depending on the business you're in, there's some businesses that literally can hire a person, put them through a week of training, and get them producing sales and revenue. Other folks, it takes 4 to 6 months to a year, depending on how technical the job might be. So our customers look at it that way. They basically say, what is my time to revenue? And the time to revenue is really the big impact that you can cut down on, because if you can say, hey, we hired 10 people and 9 out of the 10 made it, and this is the revenue they produced in this time frame. That one person, if you compare it to somebody who did make it and made the revenue production targets, I mean, that's where you're going to basically get your ROI and your cost savings or your analysis to see what the benefits would be.
Okay, let me take a look here. We have a couple more, but we are coming up against the time here. So let's go with, I guess we could take 2 more questions here. Do customers use for final interviews, and are the surveys in languages other than English?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first question, do they use them for final interviews? And the answer is yes. About 70% of our customers are actually using it to screen out candidates, and then once they do say, we do have a really great candidate we want to bring in, or 2 candidates, actually use the report to actually guide the interviews with those hiring managers who, we've all been there. If you're hiring a lot of people all the time, interviewing is not a science, it's an art. And a lot of people, especially good managers, don't interview well. Good managers typically don't have a lot of turnover. So when a good manager gets involved with having to replace somebody, a lot of times they spend too much time talking about kids, alma maters, SEC football, something like that, and instead of asking very, very good pertinent questions that are going to help figure out whether the person is a fit or not. So if you put the report up in front of them and you give them a roadmap, a guide, if you will, it really helps them. It really helps them through the interview process and can help screen things out. The second question with the languages, and you think about if you're recruiting a person who is multilingual and maybe they have references who are either in the U.S. and English is their second language, or they are multinational organizations that are recruiting in China and Brazil and Europe. It's going to be important to be able to get references, the surveys in their local languages. So somebody in China can get a Mandarin Chinese survey, and somebody else that's also in China but happens to be an expat from Australia will get it in English. So we have the surveys will be available for use in Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, French, and German. So again, you think about multinationals, you think about even in the U.S. In some of the regions where you want somebody who English is their second language, not their first, to really be able to answer questions and help profile those candidates.
Great. And Jack, I'm going to take one more question and close out the session here. Who establishes the critical performance criteria, and on what basis do they establish it? For example, a major account manager for computer hard drives to Dell might have very different requirements from someone selling tires to GM. Can you please explain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you think about the common traits amongst a salesperson who would be in those two scenarios, I mean, selling something to Dell or selling something to GM has very similar tactical execution things. I mean, you know, you've got to go into GM, you've got to do a lot of discovery. You probably have to talk to 14, 15, 10 different people, 5 different departments. You might talk to C-level people. You might talk to people in a warehouse or in a plant. Same thing with Dell. I mean, even though you know something that's technical, you know, a hard drive for a computer or maybe some type of software or whatever it might be, the sales cycles are very similar across industries. But it's the type of sale, you know, that kind of sale where you have to put together a complex proposal, a lot of discovery, work internal, external, and make sure you're going to hit the mark. It's very similar compared to somebody, say, that's out selling you know, tools, going door to door. And you know, they fill up their truck in the morning and they just keep knocking on doors till the tools are gone. So you know, those traits, those personalities are very different. Those behaviors, those competencies. So what our IO psychologists do is they study all those behaviors, all those competencies that you see in those different job roles, and then they boil those things down to make sure that they are going to show and predict somebody's future behavior based on what their references are going to say. We're going to ask those references very specific questions about that, but I think that's a terrific question because it's something that when we develop those surveys, and especially for me, near and dear to my heart is the sales organization, we spend a lot of time internally talking about that and making sure that those tools are going to really predict how somebody is going to do in your organization when you use a tool like skill survey.
Fantastic. And that's all the time we have for today. So I want to take a moment again to thank Jack, Vice President Field Operations with Skill Survey. They are our partner and sponsor for today's session. So Jack, thank you very much for the great information. And of course, thank you to everybody who joined the call today. It's a pleasure having everybody.